What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So even though the 2024 draft isn't even a week old, it happened 5 days ago last Friday, it's never too early to look ahead to the 2025 draft now that we're technically on to the 2025 draft. So today I wanted to give you my way too early top 10. I gave like a way too early one like 4 or 5 months ago on my Instagram, but now that all of their seasons are over, the U18s happened, I wanted to update it. I wanted to go through it because I think the 2025 draft is honestly looking to be better than the 2024 draft. I think at the top, you have a consensus number one guy, similar to the 2024, but I think the forward class is a lot better than 2024. The defense class isn't quite as good as 2024, but there's a lot of potential, maybe not franchise forwards, but legit number twos that can be on high level contenders. So we're going to go through it right now. We're going to break it down. We're going to start with number one, because you can probably assume who is number one, and work our way down all the way to number 10. And at number one, I have the pride of Long Island from Hop Hog. Long Island, grew up an Islanders fan. It is James Hagins. When looking at James Hagins, one of the best U.S. developmental program players, just straight up, period, in that same tier of a Jack Hughes. Amazing skater, amazing playmaker. He really differentiated himself this year as the consensus number one. Set the goddamn record at the U18 World Juniors with 22 points in 7 games. He was amazing. When looking at him in the USHL, he was also great. He had 47 points in 26 games for 1.81 points per game, which was the most in the entire USHL. Trevor Conley was second at 1.5, so he was by far the best player in the entire USHL, despite only being 17 years old. He has a November birthday. I think that it's pretty consensus at this point that James Hagins, now whether is he generational? No, of course he's not. He's not a Connor Bedard. He's not a Connor McDavid, but he genuinely is in that second tier with the Macklin Celebrini, with the Jack Hughes, with the Nathan McKinnon. He is a little bit on the small side. He's only 5'10", but the skill is just so undeniable with this kid when you watch him play. Amazing skater, amazing playmaker. Maybe he doesn't have the best shot, but he still has a very solid shot. Just every other part of his offensive game is so special. Great vision. So I think without a doubt, unless something insane happens, James Hagins is going to go first overall. It's going to be very interesting to see him. He's going to Boston College, I believe, to play. He's not doing another year in the U.S. developmental program. He's going to be playing immediately, probably on that top line with Ryan Leonard and Gabe Perreault, considering Will Smith is going to be going to the NHL. So I was a little bit concerned for his freshman year if he was going to have to play the second line center position on Boston College. But no, he's going to be given the keys to the goddamn castle over at Boston College and probably put up monster numbers. Probably put up numbers similar to Macklin Celebrini or Will Smith last year. I don't think that's ridiculous. So James Hagins going to be a consensus number one. Even if Chicago, even if San Jose get the first overall pick, they're not passing on James Hagins. I know for San Jose, they would already have Will Smith. They would already have Celebrini. First off, Hagins is a much better prospect than a Will Smith. On top of, he's just so much, he's better than everybody in this entire draft class. I'm not even trying to be a biased American when I say that. He's going first overall. No ifs, ands, or buts, unless one of the guys just has a generational draft year and really explodes. At second overall, Porter Martone is kind of solidifying himself as that second overall prospect in this class. Not locked up by any stretch. He's going to have to play really good this year in the OHL. But when looking at him, 6'3", right winger, heavy shot, very good playmaker, and a surprisingly good skater. At U18s, he dominated with Gavin McKenna on Team Canada. 17 points in 7 games this year for the Mississauga Steelheads that are now the Brampton Steelheads. He had 33 goals, 38 assists for 71 points in 60 games. Again, don't think that he's a winger, so I don't think he's ever going to be like a franchise number one guy. But I think if you have a solid center, if you have a number one legit star center, he can be a legitimate 40 goal, 50 assist, 90 point top 30 player in the entire NHL. I don't think that's ridiculous for Porter Martone, given his size, speed, and skill. He's a very intriguing prospect, and right now, he's my number 2. We start maybe spicing things up at third overall. I'm going to go with Roger McQueen. I'm going to stay in the CHL, but go over to the WHL. McQueen is a center and is 6'5". He could be this year's Caden Lindstrom. I think he's a better playmaker. Caden Lindstrom was a better finisher, but when looking at McQueen, extremely skilled, similarly to Martone, and especially at 6'5", a very good skater. I would like to see him use his physicality more. He's still kind of growing into his body, so he's not throwing massive hits. He needs to put on some weight. But when looking at him compared to like a Caden Lindstrom only had 42 points in 61 games in his draft year, -1. You look at Roger McQueen this year in the WHL, 51 points in 53 games. So if he really pops this year in his draft year, given his build, given his overall potential, I could see him potentially going second overall. When looking at what he built on this year, his draft year -2, he only had 14 points in 55 45 games. So he took a massive step this year. It's perfectly reasonable that he might take another massive step as well. The potential with this kid outside of James Hagins might be the highest in this entire draft. At 4th, Anton Friberg. There were serious debates. Well, like this time last year, Friberg was kind of looked at as that number 2 guy. Still a very good prospect. Absolutely tore it up in Swedish U20s, 1.6 points per game. It's going to be very interesting to see if he plays in Swedish U20s next year, if he goes up to the 2nd tier. I always botch the name of that, but it starts with an A. Or if he plays in the SHL, similarly to a Leo Carlson. But when looking at Friberg, just a very creative player with the puck, a natural-born playmaker akin to like an Elias Pettersson. I think he projects as a low-end number 1 center. I don't think he's going to be like a franchise guy, but he could be a good number 1 center based on the way that he's trending right now. At number 5, we got Ivan Rabkin of the MHL over in Russia. He plays for Denomie, not SKA, but again, another very skilled Russian forward. Rabkin is a center instead of a winger, similarly to unlike an Ivan Demidov and a Matvey Michkov. He's not quite the prospect that Demidov or Michkov was for comparison. He still had a great 58 points in 44 games in the MHL this year, which was 4th in the entire league. When you compare that to Demidov's draft year -1, he had 1.455, and Michkov was all the way at 1.825. But again, just a high-end offensive guy, playmaker. I think he has a little bit more of a motor, more of a defensive game overall than Ivan Demidov, and definitely more than a Matvey Michkov. Matvey Michkov does not really play defense, but Rabkin can eventually be a high-end. I could see him being a 70, 80-point center. It's going to be very interesting to see how he develops. I think he's going to stay at the MHL akin to an Ivan Demidov. He plays for Dynamo Moscow, which is a very good KHL team. It's not like he's in one of these lower ones like we saw with Torpedo, with Artemanov and Silyev. So him in the MHL, you got to look for him hopefully post between like 1.7, 1.8 points per game. Don't think he's going to be a Demidov putting up 2 points per game, but he's a very talented Russian forward. 6th, we have Jacob Ice Wozniak. Fun fact about him, he actually was born in Australia and then came over to Sweden. And when looking at him similarly to a Martone and McQueen, he's big, he's skilled, he skates very well. That's kind of the theme of this draft outside of Hagins, who's kind of undersized. When looking at it, 6'3", moves extremely well, has fantastic vision for someone of his age, was extremely productive in the Swedish U20s, akin to a Friberg. He had 22 goals, 28 assists, 50 points in 36 games. He actually got some action at the SHL level. It'll be very interesting to see what level he plays at next year. But given this guy's size and skill, I think he's a safe bet to go top 10. And he's really risen in the past year. So it wouldn't be surprising this time, or like 9 months from now, we're talking about him being a legit top 5 contender. At number 7, Logan Hensler. He has fallen a little bit, in my opinion, not like that much. He's still my number 1 defenseman, but about like a couple months ago, a year ago, you would say that he was top 5 pretty safely, by far the number 1 defenseman. Not exactly the case anymore, but still a very, very good prospect. 6'2", already 200 pounds. The perfect NHL number 1 defenseman kind of build. Right shot defense, a very smooth skater. The offense wasn't that impressive this year for the U.S. National Team Development Program. He only had 32 points in 61 games. Part of that was Cole Hudson was their number 1 offensive defenseman, but still, I definitely need to see some offensive progression from his game next year at the University of Wisconsin. It's going to be interesting to see how he does at the college level relative to guys we've seen recently like Zeev Boyum and Artem Leshinov immediately be impact guys. But I think Logan Hensler is going to be a very, very good two-way defenseman. Number 8, Michael Misa. When looking at Michael Misa at age 15, and even this time last year maybe, there was a serious argument that he was over James Hagins, considering the fact that he got exceptional status in the OHL, put up 56 points in 45 games. That was comparable to like a John Tavares, to a Connor McDavid when they got exceptional status. The only problem is the following year, those guys exploded, got to like 1.5, 1.6 points per game. Misa actually took a step back in terms of his point per game production. He only had 75 points in 67 games, and it's not like he was on some bad team. He was on the Saginaw Spirit that had Zane Parekh, that really went all in terms of the fact that they were winning the Memorial Cup. They were a loaded team, and Misa really didn't take that next step. So he's still a very good skater, has fantastic vision, fantastic hockey sense. I still like him as a prospect, still top 10, but considering the fact that he did kind of plateau this season, on top of only being 6 foot, not really having any elite trait that really makes me think that he has this high potential, like a Roger McQueen, like a Porter Martone, I am going to drop him a little bit here. Still think he's a top 10 guy. It's going to be very interesting to see how his OHL season goes. He needs to take a step, because if he's just a bit over point per game again, he's going to fall even more, considering right now, still some of his ranking in his hype is coming from what we saw, what he did at 16, 15, 16 instead of 16, 17. So it's going to be very interesting to see how he progresses next year. Caleb Denomie, I think I'm pronouncing that right. I looked up a bunch of clips before that. But when looking at it, he was the number one pick in the QMJHL last year. And for good reason. He came in, scored 56 points in 60 games right out of the rip. 6'2", decent playmaker, or very good playmaker with solid vision. It's going to be very interesting to see how he does in the QMJHL. We have not seen the QMJHL really pump out a ton of prospects since Alexis Lafreniere. So it is a little bit of the weaker league in the CHL. But considering he was near point per game in his draft year -1, if he really explodes next year, he has a decent shot at being a first round, top 10 pick. He's going to be a first round pick. Lastly, Matthew Schaefer, number 1 pick in the OHL draft last year. He's an Erie Otters defenseman, and the offensive production really wasn't there this year. I'm not going to lie. He had 17 points in 56 games, but when looking at him, he is going to be like arguably probably the youngest player in this entire draft, arguably definitely in the first round. His birthday is September 15th. The kid is still 16. The kid is 10 days away from the cutoff to instead be eligible for the 2026 draft. So when looking at Matthew Schaefer, I look at his skating and his defensive game. I think the offense is going to progress. He is an amazing skater for someone his age at only 16 years old playing in the OHL, and I think his defensive game is very good. So as long as he takes a step offensively, like I think that he's more than capable of, he should be a lottery pick. He should arguably be a top 10 pick. He's like 6'2", 6'3", very good skater, very good defenseman. The offensive game, I think he is better offensively than the stats suggest. Not an amazing offensive guy, but I think he has potential to eventually be a number 1 defenseman. But yeah, here's the full list. Hagins, Martone, McQueen, Frondell, Rabkin, Wozniak, Hensler, Misa, Denomie, and then Schaefer. But yeah, let me know in the comments, what do you think about this list? Who'd you move up? Who'd you move down? Who am I missing? Malcolm Spence, William Moore, some other names that you could maybe throw in here. It's going to be a very interesting cycle. We saw this time last year, everybody had Aaron Kiviharju in their top 10. He ended up going 122nd. So there's going to be a lot of movement. Cole Argerman was second in everybody's mock draft last year. It's going to be interesting. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? Maybe I'll do a mock draft in a month. No, that'd be really stupid. But let me know in the comments, what do you think? I'll be seeing the next one.